All right, welcome back. I'm skipping the intro. Checked out the last videos. You want the intro? We're getting right into part 5. Website link is in the description. Click it and you'll be able to follow along. Okay, part 5. So, up until now, we've only really executed code line by line. We just saw an exception when we define functions and call them later in our code. And there are two other really useful tools that also sort of break the pattern of code flowing top to bottom, line by line, as we've seen. And the first one that we're going to talk about are called if-else statements. And so the first thing is to remember booleans. And so, right, a boolean was just a variable that can store true or false, and that was it. And an if statement has this interesting structure. It has, the word if, and then this sort of block right here. And so, when an if statement, why don't you take a guess of will Josh is cool print in the output when I click play? So think about that. Give it a second. And no. And the reason that is because the way if statements work is it's basically saying if this evaluates to true, like if this is valid, then do this code. And the way you just think about it is like it's kind of just like a gate or some sort of passage that only opens if this is valid or if this is true. And so one way that we could make sure that this prints is by saying false. So if Josh is cool equals false, which is what it does. So make sure you know the difference between a singular equal sign and two equal signs, right? This is just to initialize a variable, and then this is to check, to make a check. And there we go, Josh is cool. You can also go like this. And so since this value is false, this won't print. Right? Okay, so then you can, so say you have this passageway, right? Either you let people in or you don't. You can also have this thing called an else, where you can basically think about if this works, then we'll print, and then we'll go right on to the next line. Right? So if this works, then print Josh is cool and skip everything else and go to yay. If it doesn't work, then I have to go to else and do this and then go to yay. So here, this didn't work. So we went into like sort of this else realm, printed that, and now we're out of this sort of block. And there we go. So you can also, well, no, we're not going to go there. But there you go. So it's really just, is this true or is this valid? Then we do what's here. But if it's not, then we do what's here. And understand that if this is executing, then we skip all the way down to yay. Cool, so that's really just the same thing there. Okay, to do. Oh, we already did that. Great. And so, yeah, this is just saying this is always going to print because we're just saying that this is true. Like if true, like this, basically if this boils down to a true, then we execute. And this is basically just saying that will happen every time because we've just put the word true there. Okay, great. So on to our first challenge. Define a function called absolute value. That's what that is supposed to mean. That takes in a number x and returns the absolute value of x. Great. Okay. So we want to define abs, and it takes in an input x. And so here, like the absolute value, right? If it's less than 0, it returns the positive version of that value. And if it's above 0, then we just want to return that value. So we're going to have an if statement. And we're going to say if x is less than 0, and remember the colon, because right, the colons are kind of saying like everything under this line is going to fall within this code block. So if it's less than 0, we want to return the positive version of x, which is the same thing as saying -1 times x. Great. And then we just want to say return x in the other case. You totally could have like an else and do return else or return x, but it's kind of up to you. It's maybe an artistic choice. Great. So why don't we try that out? Nice. Nice. Okay. So make sure you know. Also, like these parentheses aren't necessary, but to me it makes it a little bit more make sense. But whatever works for you. So if this thing evaluates to true, like if x is less than 0, then we want to do this code. But only if that's true. So then otherwise we do this code. And great. So that is if statements. If and else statements. So now switching gears to loops. And loops are, they have their very specific format again, and it's a lot of like just new things to throw at you, but the point is not to memorize it all in the first try, it's just to see what it looks like. So then when you write code for the AI clone, it actually feels familiar. And the more and more and more you do it, the more it feels good. Okay, so a for loop. Basically what it is it is what it sounds like, and it can execute code just multiple times. A loop is a loop, so it loops and does code. Okay, great. So the overall format is, again, like all of these, okay, sorry, never mind. So this thing is called a for loop. It's a specific type of loop. And so it uses the for keyword. And then you have some sort of list here that you're looping over. So that's kind of where the name comes from. So you'll go here, 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 and do something every time. So here, this prints the number every time. We could also do, I have this example down here. You can go over, well, why don't we do another example. So I want to double all of the numbers in the list. So we can do num times 2. So it's going to go and it's going to look at 1, and then it's going to look at 2, and then it's going to look at 3, and it's going to double all those numbers. So hopefully that makes sense with this list here. So you also don't need to define a list, right? You don't need a list right here every time. You can have a list that you've already created and then loop over all of the things in the list in the same exact way. We could take these number lists from before and then do like this. This is just something that you create. It could be named anything, but then you put in and then the name of the list, and then yeah, great. So then that will print 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 also. So this is you're essentially creating a variable here, so it can be named anything, and then you can use it as you write code that will be looped many times. Amazing. Okay, so something popular and very useful, but you shouldn't get lost in, is this range function. And so before we had lists that we were looping over, like very explicitly defined. But here is really just the same thing, except I'm pretty lazy, and I don't want to, every time every time I'm doing a for loop, I don't want to just have to type 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You know, every time I make a loop that should do something 6 times, I don't want to have to just write out this list every time. That's kind of annoying. So what people do is use this range thing. And so the range will essentially create a list. So this will create a list from 1 to 6 and print that. So that's the exact same thing as doing something like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, except it's just doing it for you when you use the range function. So the range function is like a built-in Python thing that Python has created for you just to make things easier. Okay, great. So write a function count words that takes in an input variable that is a list of words, then return the number of words in that list. Okay, so obviously there are some built-in Python things that can make this a lot easier, but we're practicing using a loop. So what we want to do is, you can imagine if we want to count all the words, we should take a look at all of the words that are in the list. So we've already done that a few times in the examples, but this is how we will do it now. So we use the for keyword to, say what we're doing, and then we're going to define just a random variable that we can use within this for loop code. So we'll say word, and then in the, we want to loop over the words list, and then we want to we want to count how many words. So every time we get to a word, we want to count, and so we're gonna make a variable called count that starts at 0, and then every time we see a word, we're gonna increase count by 1, and then at the end, we're gonna return count. This is a little, it's combining a lot of things that we've just seen. So it's definitely a lot. But the main thing here is that you're repeating this line of code for every word in the list. And so that will end up making count equal to the length of the list. So it definitely takes practice, but we're getting used to sort of how to write this sorts of code. Yup. Okay. Amazing. Thanks for watching. Hope we are learning some Python and we are getting insanely close, right? Here, you can see how useful if-else statements and for loops are. You can see the range. You can see variables. You can see everything. We are literally one video away from having all the fundamentals down. So, I hope you're excited. I am. I'll see you next time.